recording here. All right, so for those of you who are rejoining us via recording, we are going to take a look at working a few more identities. Those who are live, I was giving them first pick of what they wanted to look at. So if anyone live has one you want to look at, drop it into the chat. I don't see any right now. So what I have pulled up, what we want to look at, sorry guys, my technology is giving me some problems here, is take a look at some of the ones that are the more open-ended, that the not matching and not multiple choice that we want to look at. So let's take a look at one or two. Oh, we have someone popping in here. Oh, hold on. Kaylee says, I cannot find my Blackboard. Okay, let me see. Also, I have two more people to admit to the room. So let me admit those people. And let me make sure I have the 5.1 pulled up and that I don't have it blocked for some reason. So welcome, let's see, Ruben and Chandler. What we were taking a look at while you guys are getting in is we're going back to section 5.1, but we had to mention that 5.1 wasn't displaying on everybody's. So let me just double check the settings, make sure I didn't hide it by accident. Okay, it looks like it's opening on mine. So what I'm going to do is share my WebAssign screen with you. And we'll try to go in there together and make sure it works. So let's do that. Oop, sorry guys, I shared the wrong thing. And now I paused Zoom. Okay. So now you guys should see, I had pulled up to be able to copy and paste. I was in our course content, and just a quick reminder, if you want to print those boxes before Unit 4, 5.1 has that large fundamental identities box right here. That's kind of where I pulled it from and dropped it into the PowerPoint. So you can kind of go over here, copy and paste that into a Word document, print it off. And then in 5.2, there's a few more examples in that course content. But where we want to go now is in your assignments tab. I'm going to click into our WebAssign. I have some things turned on in my Blackboard that you guys probably don't see there, the old stuff. And let's see. I think you guys should see WebAssign. Is that correct? So I know you guys see my 143, different class, then 172, that's us. It looks like right here, the ones that are highlighted are actually ones that I went in and edited some of, like all of our past unit. I went in and either took some out or swapped some questions that I thought would be better for us and more relevant. 5.1 I left alone because I had already released it and people had already started working on it. It makes it harder to edit it, but 5.2 is edited down a little bit. So take a look. When I was in my student view, let me swap it over to student view. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell if I have something turned off. It looks like it's turned on here. So this should look closer to what you guys see. Okay, so they're kind of out of order. I think part of that was I need to change this time, 9:55 to end of the day, and they should swap back. But is anyone having issues seeing 5.1 now? Sometimes if I forget to change the due date, they'll be in like past assignments if they were past due and I didn't fix it yet, but it should be in your current assignments. All right, so drop me a yes if it's working for you, and a no, I still don't see it if you don't see what was going on there. Let's see. Okay, good. Um, hopefully, hopefully that'll work for everybody going back in. All right, so I actually clicked on 5.2, but let's go ahead and go back into 5.1 and just take a look at these. You guys can let me know which ones we want to work on. All right, so I believe we were down to about 14 or so where it stopped with multiple choice. And then things like I mentioned before everybody was on, 15 and from the rest, we just have things that need to be simplified. So it might say something like use fundamental identities to simplify. There's more than one correct answer, meaning sometimes you can stop before you're all the way simplified and you're correct, you're just not finished. So it'll be interesting, especially as you guys are working through these. If WebAssign is not counting it correct and you feel like I did it and it's checking on Desmos, it may be that you need to go a step further or it wants you to put in a different equivalent form. Don't hesitate to use the Ask My Instructor button to reach out and ask about those so I can kind of go in and see how you keyed it. Another thing that can be kind of difficult is keying these exponents. Getting everything in the right place with parentheses can be tricky. All right, so in looking at these 15 on, really 15 through the end of the assignment, are there any that you guys had either tried or wanted to look at? If so, drop it in the chat. And I'll give you guys a second to do that. Okay, so I don't see anyone dropping one in, so let's just pick one. So let's actually take a look at maybe 21. 21 kind of stands out to me because we've seen some quotients today. We've seen some other ones, but we haven't seen any higher powers. And I just realized, guys, I told you we would go back to the Desmos too. So let's return to 21. But I was eager to jump into this one, and we need to look back at that. So let's look back at the Desmos for just a second. This was actually one where we saw a quotient, we saw squareds, and we were able to simplify it. And then the trig identities we were looking at, this one in particular, at the end of the last part, we had a subtraction, quotients, squared. We had a whole lot going on. And I asked you guys to think about which one matched up, and then we'll go back to those other practice ones. So when I was looking at this one, sometimes I reach a dead end when I'm working on identities, and I'm like, I don't see where to go. And you don't have the advantage always of having options like these boxes. So that's the tough part. Like if you put this last part into Desmos and it said that's not right, it's wanting something else. So what they're wanting you to do to get to another box is to use that Pythagorean theorem and just clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to stop this share and share what I'm writing. And let's go ahead. I'm going to write down our last part. So sine squared minus cosine squared all over sine x times cosine x. All right, so when I'm looking at this, we said important thing is sine squared plus cosine squared or cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1, my Pythagorean identity. And if I wanted to, I could replace sine squared with 1 minus cosine squared, or I could replace cosine squared with, in this case, 1 minus sine squared. Just taking our identity and transforming it into the alternatives. This part, like this transformation, you have more of these in 5.2, but you see some of them in 5.1 mixed in. So when I look at this expression, I still don't necessarily know which way they're going to want me to go, but I could take this minus cosine squared and plug this part in. Okay, I'm going to need to be a little bit careful with what's happening in terms of my parentheses, but let's try that. So I've got sine squared x minus, and instead of cosine squared, I'm going to put in 1 minus sine squared. Put it in parentheses so we distribute that negative. And then on the bottom, we have sine x cosine x. Okay, so distribute that negative, and we're going to see that now we have sine squared x plus sine squared x, and then we still have a minus 1. So let's put that minus 1 out here. And then I'm going to have 2 sine squared x. Now, at this point, if I look around, I'm going to unshare, stop sharing the screen, and share my screen back the other way. Because if I look at those trig identities, when I was glancing at it before, I didn't see this one. So if I'm looking for a 2 sine squared minus 1, trying to get our pictures out of the way, guys. Not sure how that'll look on the recording. Faces will be everywhere. But notice I see this 1 minus 2 cosine squared x over sine x cosine x. So there's a 2 cosine squared, but not a 2 sine squared. So from this, they didn't have what we had, but actually what was going on, if you go back and try substituting 1 minus cosine squared instead of sine squared, we're going to get hopefully what we need here. So I think that these card sorts can be more challenging than doing it by hand, because if you were doing this by hand, like on a test, paper and pencil test, you've simplified it, you've cleaned it up. I don't know that it's necessarily simpler than what we had before in terms of helpfulness, but we still simplified in some way. So I'm going to stop this share and reshare the iPad screen. So here's what I mean, to clarify a little bit more. We started with sine squared minus cosine squared over sine x cosine x. And when I look at 2 sine squared x minus 1 over sine x cosine x, to me, that doesn't seem a whole lot simpler than this sine squared cosine squared that we started with. It's different. One benefit, or one simplified, is now it only involves sine squared and not sine squared and cosine squared. So fewer functions overall, a lot of times is deemed better. But again, it's still, I haven't been able to cancel anything else. But if that didn't match up and you had an option of what you substituted, go in and try it again. So let's do that. Because this is likely what's going to happen to you as you're trying to clean this up. You're going to try something and then you don't see it match up. And I don't want you to get frustrated. I want you to say, could I have done something else? Let me go back and reroute and try that. Okay, so we need to start with sine squared minus cosine squared over sine x cosine x. And guys, if you need me to stop and clarify, just pop in and let me know. Okay, so then notice what we did before is we replaced the cosine squared. So let's now replace sine squared. Okay? And again, we're using the idea that sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. Doesn't matter the order you write that plus. So sine squared is going to be 1 minus cosine squared. Okay, so we're going to replace all of that. So 1 minus cosine squared x. And then we still have minus cosine squared x over sine x cosine x. So cleaning that up, we can see we're going to have 1 minus 2 cosine squared x sine x cosine x. Now, if we compare back to what was on Desmos, let me share that again. Then it looks like this guy, 1 minus 2 cosine squared x sine x cosine x, is the right one. And we're going to drop that down so that it tiles below. Hopefully that's what I want. And you can kind of see we're getting somewhere with this one. Now, is it possible we could go further? Maybe, right? Maybe we could go further. But at this point, maybe we'll leave it alone. One of the things that I would look for with going further is I don't see anything else obvious on this last part, but if I have something else that could go before this part, that might be important. Now, this one, we're not going to try to take the last one further, but when I'm scanning my other ones, notice I have this other one that involves fractions in a way that looks different from all the rest, right? So all the other ones, cotangent and tangent, I could write as fractions, sine over cosine, but this one looks most similar, right? You can kind of see the form. Now, when we're trying to build these identities, again, we're having to work harder than start here and simplify. If I compare and I look at what I have compared to what's given, kind of unreverse this step. Notice I have sine squared over sine. Well, that could simplify and I could cancel one of those signs. Look at what happens to this one. And I'm just going to put it over. I'm going to try not to connect it. Make it work here. But notice here, if you did sine squared over sine, that cancels one of the signs and you have sine over cosine. Here, if you canceled one of the cosines, you have cosine over sine. So it looks like these two are actually equivalent. Now, why am I not dropping this one when I'm moving underneath that one? Well, and sometimes with identities, you might have to make it look worse to make it look better, if that makes sense. Like here, the correct way to do it, or one correct way to do it, would be to drop this guy first. And it seems a little counterintuitive because we would normally take something that's more simplified and less simplified, but we already connected that they were trying to condense into one fraction, which was a different kind of simplification than just canceling here. So these are equivalent, meaning you could sort of multiply. Think about this first half of the fraction, or the first fraction part. You could multiply by sine on top and sine on bottom. So multiplying by sine on top, sine on bottom gives you this piece. Multiplying by cosine on the top and cosine on the bottom gives you this part. The idea is to make it look bigger, to then transform into something simpler, where you only have cosine squared on top. But this part, these two are still equivalent. But notice when you see this top card now, instead of saying sine over cosine, what would we say? Tangent, right? And instead of cosine over sine, what would we say? Cotangent, right? So this is really tangent minus cotangent. Ooh, I got it, right? This guy. So clearly I'm not skilled at operating this card sort, but move this down, and then we're going to try to stack this. Okay. So once we see it all together, think about how you would have approached it. If I had given you tangent x minus cotangent x, this one's actually kind of a tougher one, one of the more difficult ones, because you're writing the reciprocal or the quotient forms. I would say division forms, but quotient forms is the correct term. And then you're doing this trick of making it look worse, which is really another way of saying finding a common denominator. So here we can't subtract unless we had a common denominator. We have cosine on one, sine on the other. So it kind of looks like cosine times sine is worse, but what we did was find a common denominator, condense the fraction, and then clean it up with a Pythagorean theorem identity. So what we would actually say is tangent x minus cotangent x is equivalent to this bottom piece, right? And the first and the last don't look all that similar, right? Because we've suppressed all of that work in the middle. Whew. All right, so questions here. We've done a lot. So let's go back. And what I want to do is tackle another one, right? Because I think now that we have part of this card sort done, I think you're going to find it easier to do the other one. And I need to look back at the key, but I think it is just 2 stacks on this one. I'll let you know if I'm wrong. But I think it's 2 stacks. It might be 3. I'll double check. And when I send out the video, I'll make sure I clarify for everybody. But you can kind of see on these ones, some of these multiplications, like you have 4 terms and a FOIL, so you can start with different ones. You may have some that don't fit. Again, I don't remember if that happens specifically in this one or not. There's so many card sorts, they all start to run together. How many are in each grouping and how many have ones that don't fit? Excuse my memory. I'm an old person. So let's take a look back at the 5.1. So before I forgot that we needed to revisit that, I was mentioning we would look at some of these other ones in PIP 1. And I had focused on 21 because I said, hey, that has a to the 4th power and we haven't done that one before. So let's tackle 21 and then I'll open it back up to you guys for any other ones that you would like to look at. So I'm going to write down 21 on the iPad and then I'll switch us over to the iPad. So notice we are looking at cosecant to the 4th minus cotangent to the 4th. I don't know if that crash just came through. I'm recording this from my basement. And I don't know if you guys could hear that crash. The children are being supervised up there, don't worry. Okay, no one's crying, so I think they're okay. All right. You guys, if you didn't hear a crash, I'd be going, she's talking crazy for no reason. But neither here nor there. So let's take a look at this one. Anytime I see 4th powers and there's a difference, I'm automatically thinking difference of squares because I've done so much factoring and I'm so used to seeing things that are to the 4th minus to the 4th, 2 terms, that I'm going to try a difference of squares. In fact, this one in the direction said factor the expression. It could have just said simplify or rewrite using identities. But here's what I want you to think about. Forget the fact that this is cosecant and cotangent. Focus on it's something to the 4th. Maybe x isn't the best. We'll just use x, right? Instead of cosecant of x, just x to the 4th minus y to the 4th. Something to the 4th minus something to the 4th. I gave you guys that. I feel very confident. Well, we don't really need parentheses, right? That was just to show you this is a little bit of a tangent that we're doing. But you guys would probably feel comfortable saying, this is really a good factor with x squareds and y squareds. It's a difference of squares, x squared squared minus y squared squared. So you would do this, x squared plus y squared, x squared minus y squared. I like to do my minuses after. And then you would probably say, hey, when I sum 2 squares, I can't keep going, but I could break x squared minus y squared into an x plus y, x minus y. So notice we're breaking that up. And we are factoring. Now, in this case, the end result, the product of factors, doesn't look simpler, but it's a different form, which is what an identity tells us. It's the same thing in a different form. So let's go back to cosecant to the 4th minus cotangent. So think about what we did and write it as cosecant squared squared. If this seems like extra work, you could jump straight to the next step. But you're going to do a difference of squared where this is really your x and your y. So this becomes cosecant squared x plus cotangent squared x and then cosecant squared x minus cotangent squared x. Okay, so this is a x squared minus y squared, x plus y, x minus y form. Now, at this point, leave the first one alone, just like we did in the previous version. And then this guy is now a difference of squares as well. Cosecant squared minus cotangent squared. So think about this one you're squaring cosecant and squaring cotangent. So those are now your new x and y's. So this is now, oops, cosecant x plus cotangent cosecant x minus cotangent. Let me write that bigger. Another thing you're going to see, like just from me writing this and leaving out a letter, that happens in WebAssign too. But if you leave out a letter in WebAssign and you're not using the math keypad, it doesn't know what you want, right? So if you write cotangent, you'll leave out the t, it's going to count it wrong. So again, don't hesitate. If you're getting stuck with these identities, let me know. Sometimes it's the form and not what you're doing. So we started here, we ended here. We factored, and we have an identity. But think about if they had given us the ending one, we could have reversed it and convex. So that one was a little different. Questions on this one? All right, so what I'm going to do is stop this share, and I'm going to switch us over to 5.2 and just talk through that one just a little bit. Okay, so I think this was in student view. Okay, so in 5.2, I edited down this line to make it shorter because I wanted you to not be overwhelmed with the sheer number. This one had like 40 some, 30 some. So you'll see that when you start 5.2, it's kind of similar to how 5.1 starts. It's reminding you of some of the basic identities. Here we have a reciprocal, we have cosine over sine, and then this one focuses a little bit more on the cofunction identities. Here we have cosine of pi over 2 minus u. That's going to be sine of u, right? Looking at those cofunction ones. You're going to do a little bit more with the trig identities. And then these are just more examples focusing on combining cofunction and more Pythagorean theorem. Now, the other thing I like about this one, particularly on numbers 8 and 9, is it kind of shows you the breakdown, like modifying. It looks like they took the left side and then they're breaking it down to get cotangent. So let me just say a little more about that. But I like that it has the blanks for you. That's kind of a nice feature. If we were doing this in class together, we would have some that are fill in the blank style. So notice on this one, you have the left-hand side cotangent, or excuse me, cosine t, secant pi over 2 minus t equals cotangent. So what they're doing is working with the left-hand side and breaking down the left-hand side, simplifying it in order to get the right-hand side. When you're dealing with an identity, you can pick either side to work with and transform to the other. It's not always the left-hand side. Sometimes it's easier to start with the right-hand side. I think they did the same thing in the left-hand side on this guy. Right? They did tangent to the fourth of x, and they want you to show that it's equal to tangent squared times secant squared minus tangent squared. And so if we think about, for example, number 9, if they write tangent squared times blank, and we know that has to equal tangent to the fourth, well, you know tangent squared has to be in that blank. Then, if you're thinking through, well, what could I replace tangent squared with? Tangent squared is something squared. Look at those Pythagorean theorem identities. If you have a tangent squared in there, look for that one, and you can think about what that's going to be, 1 minus something else squared. Get the right something else, plug in, then you should be almost there. So hopefully 6, 7, 8, and 9 will be maybe a little easier even than some of the ones in 5.1. So let's talk about what you need to do from here. 5.1 and 5.2, I kind of think about them as one trig identities, right? 2 sections, but same concepts. What you need to work on is the 2 sections of WebAssign, 5.1 and 5.2. Those are going to be open until your next test. We'll talk about that in just a second. Let me actually stop this share. Take a look at the calendar in a second. But the other thing you need to do, if you haven't already done it, is to finish up the trig identities exploration that we were already working on. You are actually only going to have one reflection. I'm going to combine it on Blackboard. I need to go in and do a little bit of editing, but you'll only have one reflection. So you only have one Desmos activity, finishing up the one we already did. Go back through it, remind yourself what was going on, and then do the practice. Then when we get into the rest of this unit, 5.3, 5.4, and 5.5, it's a little different. We're not going to continue doing as many trig identities, but we're going to do different trig identities. So we'll kind of build on this and go a little bit in different routes. As far as what we're doing pacing, let's talk about that for just a second. If you've got your calendar handy, pull it up. I will post all these dates as we go through. But my plan is this week and next week entirely, I think I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning, we're going to be focused on content. So we'll tackle 5.3 Wednesday, the 22nd. And then next week, we'll do 5.4 on Monday, 5.5 on Wednesday. That will leave for us when we come back in May. We actually only have May 4th and May 6th. And then that week ends the official class time. So that next week on May 4th and May 6th will really just be review and the test. So right now I have May 4th is review, and then opening the test probably the afternoon of May the 4th and leaving it open through the rest of the week. My plan is to have it due that Friday on May 8th. If you're having some trouble with internet access, definitely talk to me on an individual basis, but that'll give you almost the good part of a week to get the rest of that test done, and we will have wrapped up the material that Wednesday before. So part of the reason I wanted it to be due Friday is that some of you may want the option to take the optional final. So if you remember back to the syllabus back in January, there is a final exam that is optional in this course. Now, due to losing a week, I kind of pushed our stuff out so that instead of reserving a class day for the optional final, I'm truly making it optional and giving us a little bit more time to utilize these Zoom sessions. So not everyone is going to want to take this optional final, and that's okay. If you do, you will have to take that test for first and then take the optional final. My goal is to try to have all of those optional finals, pull my calendar back up, guys, in by that following weekend. So like by the end of the day on May the 10th, so that when I'm turning in grades and looking on May 11th and May 12th, everyone's completed it. So the idea here is if you finished the test by May 8th on Friday and you wanted to take the optional final, you could do so over the weekend. If you don't take the optional final, then you would be done at that point. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit pacing wise. We're not in any more of a rush than we were in Unit 3. Unit 3 felt like it stretched out longer with spring break and then that extra week off. But we really only spent 4 days, 2 weeks of content and then review in the test. So kind of the same thing going on here. In terms of other things, we are not going to have another project due. You guys already did 2, and there are some things that we could do. If anyone, I may end up, I'll think about this and let you guys know for sure on Wednesday, but there may be an option if you are looking for some extra credit. I may make the last project that we would have done in class kind of together an extra credit thing. I'm open to that. I know sometimes it's nice to have one more boost at the end of the semester, but there won't be another mandatory project because I feel like you guys have enough on your plate with the rest of the Desmos and WebAssign coming up. So let me know if you like the idea of maybe doing that extra credit project. Send me a message and I'll put something together for that. Otherwise, work on those WebAssigns. I will open the link back up to submit the Desmos reflection just right after this. And then we will move on with 5.3 on Wednesday. Any last minute questions? It's going to boot us in a minute. So I'm not seeing any questions. I'll go ahead and end our meeting. I will be on office hours tomorrow, and then I'll send these videos out in just a little bit. Thank you guys for participating and have a good afternoon.